Hey folks, Charlie here, and if you are wondering why I'm in a canoe in the middle of Lake Ontario, well that is because I'm in fact monster hunting. And no, not for Pokemon. Now, perhaps you're expecting me to talk about Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, and fear not, I do have plenty more of those videos on the way, but if you remember one of my earlier videos, I did say this channel would also be focusing on real-life myths and legends and legendary creatures. So I figured this is the perfect time when Game of Thrones is off air to talk about that other topic I've always been wanting to address. Anyway, without further fancy-footing around the point of this video today, I will be talking about a real-life monster that supposedly lived in this very lake, and that is the legend of the Lake Ontario Serpent. As the largest city in Canada, Toronto is evidently home to people from all walks of life and is one of, if not the most diverse city in the world. In spite of these facts, Toronto didn't always carry the same status it has today. In fact, if you were to ask people of my parents' generation what they thought of Toronto when they were the same age I am now, they would probably use terms like dull, conservative, and uneventful. Now, you might be wondering what those descriptors have to do with a YouTube video about a lake monster. Well, the 60s, when my folks were my age, are from an era when the last accounts describing the mysterious Lake Ontario monster showing up near the waterfront of Greater Toronto can be found. No, I'm not implying per se that the number of people living in the city would have an effect on whether or not a monster would show itself, or that it even exists for that matter, but it is interesting that this creature supposedly only existed, or was seen when the shores of Lake Ontario didn't have anywhere near the amount of activity it has today. I realize I am rambling on a little bit right now, so before analyzing the legendary creature in any greater depth, let's take this discussion back to the beginning, to the earliest accounts of the Lake Ontario monster, before moving forward in time. Long before the European colonizers first landed in the Americas, the Seneca, a group of indigenous people native to North America living south of Lake Ontario, would recount tales of a dragon named Gasiendieta. According to their mythology, Gasiendieta was a hot-tempered dragon that dwelt in the deep areas of rivers and lakes of Canada, especially Lake Ontario. This dragon would fly on a trail of fire, and it could also spew fire as well. It was also known as the Meteor Dragon in reference to its supposed origin from a meteoroid that had impacted the Earth and was equally capable of crossing the heavens on a trail of fire. This effectively makes the possible origins of this creature extraterrestrial in nature. Now, normally such a mythical beast would vanish into the obscurity of time and would simply remain a legend of the Native American people once the first European settlers reached the Americas, but as things turned out, this did not prove to be the case. As early as the 16th century, the French sparked the beginnings of the North American fur trade, an economic venture that the English would pursue later on in the 17th century. This came to play an essential role in westwards expansion into present-day Canada and the United States. It seems that these early French fur traders who penetrated into the land of present-day southern Ontario had their own encounter with a monster of Lake Ontario when one crew of a fur trade boat reported seeing a 30-foot-long great serpent. This made them unexpectedly turn back and postpone their trip from present-day Toronto to the Niagara region. This early encounter does seem to be a standalone event, as there doesn't seem to have been any reports of monster sightings in the area until the early 19th century, when reports of the mysterious Lake Ontario monster occurred during intermittent periods of time. The first of these seems to have occurred on July 3, 1817, when the crew of a ship witnessed a blackish snake-like monster, 1 foot in diameter and 30 to 40 feet in length. The monster was apparently witnessed just about 3 miles offshore. For much of that century, reports in and around Toronto would predominantly come from the crew of ships on Lake Ontario, and, surprisingly or not, children on land would also dominate as witnesses of this serpent-like monster. Or at the very least, they would endure until around 1881 or 1882, when reports of a serpent-like monster living in Lake Ontario would shift to the more northeastern city of Kingston. For the remainder of the 19th century, reports of the Lake Ontario monster, or monsters potentially, would focus around Kingston, where it would come to be known affectionately as Kingsty, following a sighting of a monster in that area in 1934 that would turn out to in fact be a prank intended to mimic another earlier hoaxed monster from Lake George in New York in 1904. This prank aside, however, it would seem that there have been a few sightings of the Lake Ontario monster in the 20th century. These include a report of the monster in 1931 by 2 physicians who spotted a 30-foot creature as they sailed from Alexandria Bay to Kingston's Yacht Club. The 2 described it as having, quote, 1 eye in the middle of his head, as well as 2 antler-like horns. The last sighting of the monster in the Toronto area apparently occurred in the former municipality of Scarborough, just east of Old Toronto, in 1968, when a resident of the area witnessed a, quote, 20-foot-long eel-like creature with a mane of some sort in the waters towards Toronto. Meanwhile, under the Kingsty moniker, the creature was apparently last seen in the 70s on 2 occasions by the same person, being an employee of the Ministry of Natural Resources. On both sightings, the man claimed that he saw a, quote, large creature dive into the lake from the shores of Prince Edward County. Now that I've detailed the history of this legendary creature, I think it's time to ask, and at least try to answer a few important questions. But I think the most important question to ask oneself is, does this creature, if it ever did, exist? Although descriptions of the creature are generally similar, they noticeably do differ amongst the supposed witnesses. For example, one report dated July 1st, 1833, by a certain Captain Abijah Kellogg and others on the schooner Polythermus, spotted a 175 blue serpent as they journeyed into Kingston Harbor. The creature supposedly had no head, but instead tapered off at either end like a giant earthworm, making a flyby at the ship before swimming up the St. Lawrence River. Meanwhile, another report by two boys named McConnell, playing at Gull Beach in Kingston in 1842, claimed to have seen a creature, only this time described as brown, 30 to 40 feet in length, with a large head, which is absolutely a very different description from the one made only 9 years prior. Because descriptions of the Lake Ontario monster vary so much throughout time, some believe that a majority of the sightings were in fact occurrences of different creatures making their own appearances. Although the length of the creatures vary from 20 all the way up to 175 feet, it is still typically described as being fast, strong, long, and serpent-like, capable of jumping up or rising up from the water. Given that its color seems to be either described as blue or brown, one could theorize that if this creature even exists, it could very well have had its own breeding population. Despite these hypotheses, scientists understandably remain unconvinced that there are such anomalous phenomena in lakes and rivers not only in Ontario, but around the world, and as a result, these creatures do not readily deserve proper or more thorough investigation. Even though many people do continue to see such creatures that are as of yet completely unexplained, the most likely instance you will ever see of a sea monster, even somewhat akin to the Lake Ontario variety, is if you just happen upon a Gyarados while playing Pokemon Go in a nearby lake or ocean. Well, folks, I think I will leave this video at that, but before I go, I strongly encourage you all to check out the sources I used to make this video, especially if you want to learn more about the Lake Ontario serpent. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.